Welcome to Train Signal. I'm Mel Haynes, and you're watching the SQL Server 2008 High Availability video. So let's roll into that. Starting with, what is the landscape? No pun intended, but we're still working with Veronicas. You know, we've got this business of this nursery business, and we need to make sure we can maintain high availability for the various offices that are popping up. So we need to look at what can we do to move beyond a single server, no matter how robust it is, to having other options available in the case of planned maintenance or unplanned downtime or any other disasters that could happen. So some of the options include, first of all, failover clustering. We'll talk a little bit about that and show you some of the things to do to get started with using failover clustering. Won't be able to build a failover cluster, and I'll talk about why. It has some pretty high hardware requirements that we're not going to try and mimic for a video, but I do want to at least introduce you to it and let you know what some of those requirements are. Next, there's database mirroring, and we'll walk through a good portion of that process and talk about some of the ups and downs and advantages and disadvantages of database mirroring. Log shipping, I want to talk to you about that one as well, and we'll play around with that a little bit. And then replication, and we'll look at that. And at the end, I want to do a little comparison of, okay, here's the pros and cons, like I said before, and which one is the best fit for various situations, and we'll look at which one is the best fit for our particular business that we're trying to run. So jumping into SQL Server failover clustering. First of all, here's the biggie with failover clustering. It is built on top of Microsoft Windows Server failover clusters. So when you want to do a SQL Server cluster, you first have to have the physical OS underneath it to support it. So your licensing cost is going to get pretty astronomically high, to say the least, because you're not only licensing multiple instances of SQL Server, but multiple instances of Windows. Now, for other solutions we're going to look at, that's still the case. That's going to also be the case for replication, because you've got separate physical servers involved with that as well. But that's the starting point. You do have multiple servers, and you'll need to implement Windows clustering first of all. It supports multiple instances of SQL Server. So this isn't at the database level, because remember, inside of SQL Server you can have multiple databases. Now in a production environment you probably won't, but you could. Right? In a development environment, in a reporting environment, you might have a need to have multiple databases per instance. But when you're dealing with clustering, this is an instance solution. You're replicating or copying. I shouldn't say replicating, because that's another thing coming up. But you're actually making additional copies of the entire instance of SQL Server. Basically, how does it work? You're dealing with one or more servers, and the term they use is actually nodes, and you have two or more shared disks. And that's a key word. The disk, the physical disk where the data is stored, is shared, and that has some ramifications. It will appear as a single SQL Server instance on your network. So from the perspective of your client applications, they don't have to deal with which node do I connect to, or how do I connect to this new thing called a cluster. It'll connect to it like it did any other server. And behind the scenes now, though, that name that it's connecting to is no longer a single physical server, but it's a virtual server, so to speak. It's the name of the cluster. Okay. An application can connect once again by referencing the failover cluster instance name is all that's needed by the application. Now, one thing to note here, though, here's some of your areas that it can protect you against. A non-disk hardware failure. Okay, so if it's something other than the physical hard disk, because going back to point number 3, I said it was a shared disk. So if the disk goes bad and it's shared, you can have multiple instances of SQL running, but they're sharing the same physical hard disk. So if it's a non-disk hardware failure, you're good. Operating system failure, obviously you're good. And then, of course, any of your planned outages, say if you're doing upgrades, you can actually do a round-robin upgrade through your cluster and therefore never have the entire system down. People can simply use whatever boxes are currently available while you're upgrading another within a cluster, which is kind of handy. Failover cluster does not protect, and I just wanted to emphasize this point, does not protect against a disk failure because you're using a shared physical disk. Multiple instances of the operating system and of SQL Server, but they're hitting the same physical disk. So you'll need to have something else to protect your physical data on your disk. You want to have a RAID system or something else in place. Where does it apply? Where can you use it? SQL Server Enterprise. It's just and really that is SQL Server. When you get into a larger organization, you're typically dealing with the Enterprise Edition. It is Microsoft's product, database product for dealing with a larger environment. SQL Server Developer, you can do it there as well, but if you remember back to the installation video, SQL Server Developer is not for use in production. It's only used for development and testing. It's not licensed for anything beyond that. So you can even develop your clustering and test it out and have a development environment for that. But for production, you're going back to the Enterprise Edition. And then SQL Server Standard Edition does support limited clustering. If you go to the Microsoft books online, they can give you the actual details on how you can slice it and dice it between the Enterprise Edition and the Standard Edition. But I can just tell you at face value, it's really the Enterprise Edition that you're going to want to focus on if you're dealing with clustering. Standard Edition is really not your primary choice or your better choice if you're doing clustering. So here, let's jump over and kind of play around with some of the options available to you when you're trying to build a cluster. We're not going to build out an entire cluster because once again I'd have to build out an entire Windows cluster first, but I just want to get you started in some of the right direction. So let's jump over to my SQL Server box and look at that. Okay, here over on the land of SQL, go Start, and I'm not going to bring up SQL Server Management Studio because there's nothing there to see. We don't have a cluster. But what I'm going to do is go to my Configuration Tools. Under here is the SQL Installation Center. And what I want to point out is simply that there are tools to help you in managing, setting up, tearing down, augmenting a cluster. If you go to Installation, here's what we use to install SQL Server. If we need to add features to our instance of SQL Server or add a new instance, right below that, actually the next two, notice what it says, New SQL Server Failover Cluster Installation. So we have a wizard. We have a wizard here that will help us to install, create a cluster. If I want to add a node, I can do that as well. And remember, what's a node? It's just another server in your cluster of servers. Now, if you were to run through this process at this point, it would quickly get to the point where it asks me, so where's the other nodes? I don't see another node. And actually, even it will note that the current box I'm on is not in a Windows cluster, so it'll stop the process pretty quickly. But that's where you would start this process. If you go to Maintenance, you actually have a Remove Node option here under Maintenance. And there's a wizard, once again, to remove nodes from an existing failover cluster. And it's not a whole lot under Tools or Resources, but if you go to Advanced, we have a couple of other tools also. We have an Advanced Cluster Preparation tool that helps prepare your environment, help you walk through the things that need to happen to prepare your environment. And once again, the base of that is a Windows cluster. And then Advanced Cluster Completion Wizard. So you have that wizard as well to help you with creating an SQL Server cluster. Next on my list is SQL Server mirroring technology. So let's jump back to the slides, talk a little bit about mirroring, and then we'll actually walk through implementing a mirror. SQL Server Database Mirroring. This is, as is clustering, primarily a software solution because you're just adding additional instances of SQL Server either locally or somewhere else across the network. This one offers almost instantaneous failover. But unlike clustering, the secondary data location is not really active until you need it. With clustering, all the boxes in the cluster are active unless you take one offline or something happens for it to crash. When in a production environment, when things are humming along like they should, they're all constantly available. But with database mirroring, your mirror is available for certain limited activities such as reporting. But other than that, it's really not being used for day-to-day activities. But you do have two different choices of how to implement mirroring, one of which does provide instantaneous failover. That comes with a cost, as always, right? The more features you get, the more you have to pay. Same thing here. And the price you pay is performance. In order to have a mirror available for instantaneous failover, you've got to be constantly updating that mirror with every change that happens on your primary box. Do you think there's a performance hit? Well, yeah, you're spending time updating not one, but two SQL Server boxes for every transaction. Once again, the benefit, it's available when you need it. You can only have a single standby database with mirroring is another thing. So for a smaller shop, just to have something there, when we started out Veronica's, and we only had our one office here in the Chicago area, and it wasn't that big yet, a mirror was a fine idea, right? So just having a single box ready to be flipped on if I needed it. And since I'm there usually and I can do that if it happens, I can do that. But it was only a one box backup kind of a deal. The basic idea is you have a principal server and a mirror server, and you're just letting data flow one way from your principal over to your mirror. But here, let's jump over and actually run through setting up a basic mirror. So setting up mirroring, if I go Start, bring up my SQL Server Management Studio, go ahead and connect to Win08 SQL 08, my only server. And if I expand this, go to my Veronica's database, right click, and go to Tasks. There's a mirror option here. Go ahead and select that. First thing it wants me to do is configure security. So I'll go ahead and say that. Now, we're going to run into a brick wall in a bit, but I'm doing this on purpose. You can see that. Click Next. Do you want to configure security to include a witness server instance? Remember, there's two different types of mirroring. One with a witness where it does a little quicker automatic failover. The downside is your performance could be a little bit slower because it's keeping that backup mirror more up to date, a little more quickly. So I'm going to say no for now because we don't have a third server. You need an actual third server instance. We don't even have a second yet, but definitely don't have a third. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Here it's asking me for the principal server instance, right? Who's the source of the information? And it's assuming the server that I already am on, my Win08 SQL 08, the port, and endpoint name of mirroring. That's fine. Any string is fine for that. Click Next again, and here's where I hit the brick wall. Mirror server instance. It's asking me to point out what server will be my mirror, and it will not let me use my same server and my same instance as a mirror. So I need to create another instance or another server. So I'm going to step out of this and do that. So let's hit cancel. I'm just going to back all the way out of this for now. And I'll even close down SQL Server. Go Start, All Programs, go out to SQL Server's Program Group, go to Configuration Tools, and there's my Installation Center. Bring that up. Go to Installation, and here's where I can add a new instance, right? Install a standalone installation or add features. Doesn't actually say instance there, but that's coming up. You want to navigate out to wherever your software is. Mine is still in my CD-ROM drive. That's where I have my SQL server. So I'm basically installing SQL all over again. I'm creating a whole new instance, a whole new copy of SQL running in the environment. So I'm clicking OK. And it starts the whole install process. So if you've seen the video one with the install, it won't be a whole lot new here, other than I'll be telling it that I want to create a new instance name. Now here, form a new installation versus add features. This is actually a new installation because that's my current instance. The MS SQL Server, that's my current instance, and I don't want to change that one. So it'll be like a new install. Click Next. Take my product key that's in there. I'm using the one that comes with a built-in product key. You have to accept the terms, no choice there. Click Next. I just need a basic database engine. Click Next. And here's where I get to name my new instance. So I'm not modifying the default instance. See, it tries to default to that same name again. You want to go ahead and put in a new instance name, so I'll say mirror for my new instance. Click Next. You can call it anything you want to. I just picked the name mirror. Click Next again. Same thing, I need to give it valid names for SQL Server Agent, for the engine, etc. I'm going to just kind of bypass that and take the easy route for now and just put my administrator account in there. But you want to, just like before, create an account for that. So if you're using a domain, you want to go to your domain controller and create a new domain account. If these mirrors are going to be across the network and need to communicate, or if it's going to be local only, you want to create a new local account. But for now, I'm just going to throw in here my administrator account. So I'm going to go with my local administrator account. I'm hard coding in there that it's the local guy. Check names. It found that. It liked that. Click OK. It liked that. Do the same thing for the next one. Administrator. Give it the password. And browser, I'm not even going to bother. It'll give it a default account on that one. So I'm good to go on that. The engine is set to start automatically. SQL Server Agent is set to start manually, and we're not doing anything with it for now, so that's fine. Click Next. Don't want it running if I'm not using it. Windows Authentication again. Add my current user, which is my administrator. It found that for me. Data directories can stay the same. File stream, don't need that turned on. That can stay the same. Click Next. No, I don't want to send any extra reports to anybody. Click Next. 7 failed. I'm sorry, 7 passed. 0 failed. 0 warnings. 4 skipped because we didn't need them. Next again. I like what I see in my final summary. If you don't, change it. I'm going to go with an install. And now we get to watch the water rise. So I will fast forward and see you as soon as this is done. Click Next. Installation was successful. I can close that down. Same here. Close it all down. And I should have a new instance here. Click Start. SQL Server Management Studio. And we want to log into our new instance this time, which is simply called Mirror. And if you haven't seen me do that before, we'll do it now. You simply use server name / instance name. So I need to add a little extra onto the end here. Simply the name of the instance. Click Connect. And I'm in. So we've successfully created our new instance, right? And the Explorer will populate in a second. So what we want to do is go back to our primary and go back there and finish creating our mirror. So I'll go back to Connect, Database Engine. I can do it without logging out of the second instance, I should say. Back off of that, not too much. Click Connect again. So I'm actually logged into both instances, which is fine. So I'm going to open up the databases folder again, right click on Veronica's, go back to Tasks, go back to Mirror, bring up that wizard again, and charge on. Configure security again, brings up the wizard, next. No, we don't want to have a witness, talked about that already. Next, next. Now, I can grab that mirror out of the list, right? Click there. Are you sure you want to do that? Connect? Yes, I do. Go ahead and do that. So I'm connected. So I can just jump to the finish line at this point. We'll just walk through it. Service accounts for the following instances. I could create some additional accounts for that. I'm just going to go with the defaults for now. And do finished. And I've successfully created a mirror. Now, I can start it now, or I can say don't start it. I'm not going to start it at this point. So I'm going to say do not start mirroring. But I've set it up, it's ready to go, and I can start it later on by coming back in here and simply going start mirroring. And if I wanted to add a witness later, I could do that. Once again, operating mode, we have a choice of high performance, asynchronous, high safety, where it's not asynchronous, it's synchronous, right? So those are the two options. If I went back to this one, once again, I'd have to have a witness. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And I've gone through the process for setting up mirrors, so I could go through and start that process, but I don't have another database or anything over there set up. I don't really need to have a mirror set up, but setting it up is not that involved, so it's pretty cool stuff. So let's go back to the slides and continue on. Looking at option number 3, SQL Server log shipping. And if you've seen the video on backups, this might already start to come into focus for you. If you remember the backup logs or the transaction log files that we backed up, we're talking the same thing. In the case of backups, we simply saved them in case we needed them, and if we didn't, we just deleted them and they never got used. Well, in SQL Server log shipping, we're actually copying or saving those transaction logs to a location on the network where they are then restored to other instances of SQL Server. So in essence, you are applying those transactions again using those transaction logs. A little bit of the information on those. With log shipping, you can have one or more standby databases. So there's one difference between log shipping and mirroring. You can have multiple receivers of those logs. They are not actually running. They are typically considered warm standbys because you're constantly restoring them via the logs, but they can be quickly brought online. How often does it happen? You get to choose how frequently your backups of those log files are made and when they are applied. So just like with configuring your automated backups, the same thing here. We'll actually see the interface. It's really the same interface at some points. Your delay on creating and restoring is also configurable. Now, one thing you'll have to note, though, you have to manually apply your final log backup before you can do a failover crossover to the other server. So let's say something happens with your primary server and you want to move to your backup, your server that's receiving the logs. Just like with restoring a backup, you have to first grab that last portion of the log file and then use that during the restore. The same thing applies here with log shipping, which means it requires a manual intervention to bring those servers online. But as I said before, you can support multiple servers. You can be shipping these to multiple locations. And so with that, here let's look at some of the configuration setting places that you would use for log shipping. So going Start, go to my Server Management Studio again. I'm going to log into my local box. And I have my Veronica's database here. I'll expand that, right click. If I go to Tasks, there's a Ship Transaction Logs interface. Go ahead and bring that up. Here's where I get to enable this as a primary database and a log shipping configuration. Go ahead and click that, and you'll start to see stuff that looks like your regular backup stuff. Here's your backup settings button. I click on that, I get to tell it where do I want to save these log files. I can put time constraints. How long do the files lay around? Because remember, we're going to use these to apply them to another box, and then after a certain amount of time, we want them gone. If the backups fail for some reason or another, right, we haven't done a backup in a while, we can send an alert saying, hey, I'm not receiving any new information. The backup job. We're going to be using the SQL Server agent, just like before, to push this process along. It's just another job that I can disable or enable. Going to the Schedule button, you'll see something that looks real familiar if you looked at the SQL Server agent video. The exact same interface for scheduling a job, setting a schedule for that job, what type of a job is it. So you're using the exact same tool, SQL Server agent again. So I'm going to cancel out of this, but just wanted to give a quick intro to that. So the point is, this is another way to take information from one server, a primary server, make it available on other servers. Cancel out of here. And let's jump back to our slides. So the things to note, with this you can go to multiple standby servers. It does require manual intervention, however, in order to bring it online. And for our fourth and final option, as far as high availability, wanted to look at SQL Server replication. Replication uses the concept of some source for your information. The term they use is a publisher, and then some location where that information ends up. The term they use for that is subscriber, so the model is known as the publisher subscriber model, and for other reasons as well. Some of the benefits here is you can distribute data to multiple servers, secondary servers known as subscribers. And some other cool things you can do with replication include data filtering and partitioning. So you have a choice of a very finely controlled choice. You can do at a very fine level what information goes. So you can determine what rows from particular tables, what columns from particular tables are being sent to the subscribers. Another big benefit of replication is this is real time. The subscribers are constantly available, so you can make those a part of your database availability plan. Those servers are available for clients, for applications to access that information at all times. Unless some other type of failure happens, they are available. So subscribers are online and available throughout the entire process. So looking at a comparison of the various choices, I have clustering, mirroring, log shipping, and replication. I wanted to give you a little high-level comparison of the four to kind of review that. Automatic switchover is available for clustering and mirroring, depending on which configuration. Remember, that one has two configurations, and there's a cost for automatic switchover for mirroring. And then replication, you don't really call it automatic switchover, actually neither for clustering, because the other servers are always available really in clustering or in replication. But the switchover or the availability of the other boxes is there without anything that you have to do. Can you have more than one secondary box with clustering? Yes. With mirroring? No. With log shipping? Yes. With replication? Yes, definitely. Manual switchover is available for mirroring, and it's the only option with log shipping. Where is it available? Enterprise, developer, and standards with the E, D, and the S stand for. The W stands for work group. So with clustering, you can get it for the enterprise, developer, or the standard edition like we talked about before. Mirroring is only available in the enterprise edition. Log shipping is not available for the developer edition, but it is available for the work group edition. And then replication, everywhere, always, it's there. Except for, one exception would be your SQL Server Compact editions or Express editions, which are not really intended for any type of a production environment anyway. What about performance? Can they be used as a way to increase or improve performance? Clustering, yes, because once again, you're adding additional resources that are alive and available for users to access. And the same thing with replication, because you've actually copied data to other servers so that now users can hit other servers other than a single primary server to access data, so you've distributed the workload. The copying that happens is at database level or server level. For mirroring, log shipping, and replication, that's all at the database level. You can choose to replicate everything in the server, but it's at the database level. You set it up per database, as opposed to with clustering, you set that up at the server level. Hardware failure protection. For clustering, I said no, but really that's the disk. If there is a disk failure, clustering does not protect against that. Mirroring, log shipping, and replication, they all protect against all of those hardware failure problems. Distributed data, clustering is not really providing a way to distribute data around your network, nor is mirroring. It's just a separate copy with mirroring. Log shipping, however, you can ship those logs anywhere else. Now, they really aren't available till you turn them on and activate them, but it is available somewhere else around the network. But really, the primary choice for having distributed data available around your network would be replication. And then, are your other boxes actually considered live? So that kind of goes back to our first one of automatic switchover, in that clustering and replication, they're always really available. Those services of those other services, of those other servers rather, is always ready for you and ready to go. So looking at that, we've decided that replication is the way to go for Veronica's. So in our next video, we're going to actually go ahead and develop that and show how we can use replication to replicate data to the various offices for that business. So what are some terms we learned? Really only two significant new terms. We talked about the concept of a node, which applies specifically to SQL Server clustering, and the various servers that are in your cluster are considered nodes. And then the term instance isn't really new. We've used it before, but since it was such a big part of mirroring, we wanted to bring that out again. But it's simply another copy of SQL Server that's running on the same server, or you can have instances on another server. But it's a way to have multiple databases all within a single Windows and or SQL Server configuration management paradigm. And what did we cover? Real simple. We talked about 4 ways to provide high availability. What are 4 options that are available to you? And then what should you know how to do as a result of this? Primarily define what are the options for SQL Server high availability. What do you have at your disposal? And there are, if you search around, you can come across a few others. If you check books online, there are a few other options, but those are the main 4 you're going to most commonly see. And we talked about how to compare the various solutions so you can begin to choose the one that is most appropriate for your environment. So with that, that brings us to the end of this video, and I definitely look forward to seeing you in the next video where we actually continue this discussion, but looking more closely at replication.